Well, welcome everybody. My name is Linna, as you heard, and sorry, I saw more people in the waiting room. So I'm so excited to talk about gardening. I was just sharing that I was out this evening driving my daughter to a basketball game, and I heard spring peepers. And I don't know about you, but that just gets me really excited this weekend. I live in Virginia, and it was just balmy and warm, and I had lots of things to do in the house, but I was busy planting pansies and getting my kale in the ground. So anyway, you got me at a great time because I'm just really excited to talk about gardening. So, all right, I just want to share a little bit that I love pictures. I've been gardening, in the end, we all have different experiences with gardening, and I'll share my story a little bit. As I started when I was around 9 years old, my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and once we were a little bit older, she decided that she was going to go back and get her nursing degree. And so she said one year, I'm just not going to garden. And she's like, I'm just too busy. I have too much on my plate. And the thought of not gardening, to me, to not have something that, it was just part of the rhythm of my life. I just knew that going out to the garden, whether it was walking around, just whatever it was part of who I was. And so to hear that my mom said no more, that wasn't allowed. So of course I said, I will take over the garden. And wouldn't you know, she was never the head of the garden again. She allowed me to take on that. And so at 9 years old, I was planting and planning. I would sing a little tune. I don't know if anybody else sings this or knows this, but I would sing inch by inch, row by row. And I just felt that, I don't know, I'd gotten the gardening bug and I was hooked. So after, fast forward many, many years of me gardening at home, when I went through university and I bought my first home, I was like, whoa, here I have no room. Like I lived in Ashburn, Virginia. I had what they call a postage stamp home or yard. And I didn't know what to do because I was like, I have to garden, but I wasn't used to such tight spaces. Point is, that is where my gardening adventure begins. And that's really what I'm going to take you through today. And I'm going to talk about some creative gardening techniques. I want to give you that beginning part of my story because what I love about gardening is that we all have different personalities. We all have different stories. We don't have to have moms who gardened. We don't need any of that, right? We just need a desire and a curiosity to want to garden. And if you have that, then the sky's the limit. So, Gita, you can see my garden, love? I hope I'm not sharing the wrong one. All right, awesome. So the point is that I love to talk. I'm trying to slow it down because Gita knows I can talk a lot and talk fast. But today, you're getting my full attention. I'm going to share a lot of pictures. If there's something that you would like me to go back about, absolutely. If you have some questions, put them in the chat and I'll have some great pauses where I can address those. But I just really want to make sure that gardening is something that's so unique to each one of us. The gardening, our style can meet us where we are at. If you just want to do patio planting, great. I heard that your community has a community garden, which is great. I've heard you guys have drip irrigation. You have some amazing things going on. So point is, if you have one plot and that's all you have, I just want to show you how to get the most of that. If you have a busy year and you're not going to have tons of time, I want you to just be creative and say, hey, what could I plant that will work with me? Well, I'll tell you right now, if you like beans in your soup, the best thing, you plant shelling beans and you don't pick them till they're dead. So it doesn't get better than that. It's super easy. The point is that we all need to just take up gardening. There's no perfect recipe. There's no perfect approach. It's really just being creative and having fun. And I will say, because someone recently asked me this, have you had a failure year? And what is failure? I've certainly had years where I've lost a lot to bugs or whatever it was, but nothing's ever a failure because it's kind of like a movement meditation for me. Gardening is that thing that I just love to do. And yes, I'll get something from the garden, but the point is to me that there's never failure in gardening. This is me in lots of different shapes and sizes. This is my number one man. His name is Clover. We didn't know he was a rooster, so he just has an interesting name. He's right in the middle. And then anyway, the point is I have chickens. I love them. They help me with my fertilizer and turning the garden. Actually, I allowed them all into my garden, and they turned it and ate lots of bugs this weekend. So we're getting ready. So this is me. My name is Linna, and I'm just really happy to be here. Rebecca, she just found me on the web and said, "Hey, would you love to talk about gardening?" And funny enough, I love it. I love everything about it. So thanks for being here tonight. All right, let me just readjust. All right. So, I always like to start with, why is food gardening important to you? And this picture, all these pictures are from my garden. And I think it's just, think about why you're here. Was it the square foot gardening that drew you here? Great. Is it that, you're an experienced gardener, you always like tips, whatever it is, hopefully you're going to learn something tonight. But like I said, it's all about just having that inspiration and that desire for gardening. So this is actually a picture. I talk about a garden personality, but there's so much of who we are. Just think about all that you do that is reflected in your garden. So what's interesting is when I first moved to my house in Virginia, this was my garden. It was an actual old heirloom rose garden. And I adjusted it and turned it into a vegetable garden. But look at all the various types of potting areas I have. I have, if you notice those they're like stand boxes. They're raised off the ground. I thought I might want to try that. You see a little chair there. That's for my daughter. The point is I have a teepee of beans right there. Point is I was like low and high, like this represents my personality. I'm just gonna go out there, try it all. But you have a garden personality as well. And I think when you see some of the pictures that I have of other gardeners, some of those might come call to you. But the point is, make it your own. You're not going to go into your garden and spend time there unless it represents you. So embrace it. If you like linear, be linear. If you like messy, be messy. But just make it a place that feels like home to you. So this is this is that same space that you just saw, but it got upgraded. So I used to have a lower garden, upper garden. I decided to create a kitchen garden. I have 2 children, and just having this by my front doorstep was really just works for me. So this is just an alternate view of what's called a veggie patch. The one thing that beyond gardening, which is a passion of mine, the earth is a passion of mine. We run all of our cars of waste vegetable oil, which I guess you'll see a picture in a moment. We've converted over 6 cars. These are 2 of our cars. This is another, that's Veggie Rim again. But we have converted them, meaning they run completely off waste vegetable oil, which is very nice when you're having a Ukrainian crisis and your oil prices are shooting up every day. So we actually collect oil from restaurants and we filter it, and then we actually put it into our trucks. This is definitely a dying breed. It's not like you can just go out and convert your car to vegetable oil, but I just want you to understand that in my heart of hearts, sustainability is at the core of why I food garden. I just feel that it keeps me in touch with the earth. It's my connection. And so not only do I garden, but we do this with our cars, and it's very messy, and we've had accidents with vegetable oil all over our cars. It's not pretty, but it's just something that's important to us. But what's interesting is, if you notice, I called it Veggie Patch, my house. The reason I call it Veggie Patch is because I grow the vegetables and my husband runs the veggie cars. So it was a nice union to be able to call it Veggie Patch. All right, so this is a 6th car that we converted. This was actually the first one, and it was a very old Mercedes, and that's my stepdaughter, and we were in a local newspaper, and we were actually holding the oil. So I don't know if I said this already, but it's not biodiesel, it's straight oil. So if you are driving behind me, you will smell wherever that oil came from, wontons, barbecue, whatever it is. Anyway, Unfortunately, like this is a dying breed of cars because you can't do them to new cars. So we are making the shift to e-cars. But anyway, I'm very proud of our time for running our cars off vegetable oil. All right. Let me see if there's any questions here. All right. So when I first spoke with Rebecca, she was like, "Ooh, could you talk about square foot gardening?" I said, "Absolutely. I am a certified square foot gardener. I think it's wonderful. I'm going to talk more about Mel and why he thought it was such a great, approach to gardening, and as I do as well. But I want you to also understand there's lots of really interesting ways of doing gardening, and I think that's what really got me going when I finally had a small space, and I was like, I want to do more. I want to do a lot in a small space, and I didn't realize there were all these things out there. So vertical gardening, really simply, and you guys can ask more questions later, but vertical gardening just means growing things up, and you really can grow anything up. So imagine cantaloupes at your head. You can, because I can show you pictures. There's nothing that you can't grow up. In that picture, I know it's kind of hard to see, but I did pole beans, but I made it into kind of like a tent so my kids could play underneath it. You can do pumpkins. You can do anything you want. The plant is very strong. Those vines are very strong, even though people don't think they are. So if you don't have a ton of room, just know that not that they're not going to naturally climb themselves, but if you move them to a support and then you connect them, you can grow things up. So anyway, I love vertical gardening. It's great. Straw bale gardening, I tried this a couple of times. It wasn't a huge hit, but hey, if this is all you got, you just take an actual bale of hay, and you kind of cut into it and you put a little bit of topsoil. But the point is that as it composts itself, it creates this growing medium for your plants. So I've tried that before. I've tried, my pictures, container gardening, of course, not because I actually have lots of property. I have 3.5 acres here, but why not? Like there are a lot of cool varieties that are created just to be small. And that's nice. If you have like a butternut squash, instead of, making it go up or taking up a lot of room, they have a lot of compact bush varieties. So, and the point is that it's nice. It's also, I heard you might have some deer in the area, and no one likes the deer eating their gardens. So obviously container gardening is a nice option for that as well. In terms of the last one, which is lasagna gardening, now it's funny. When I say lasagna gardening, the person who created it, so there's several books on the topic. It's not because it has anything to do with growing tomatoes or anything of that sort. It's about sheet composting. So think about building a lasagna. You have a layer of sauce, a layer of pasta, a layer of cheese. In sheet composting, you do the exact same. You create a layer of ground mulch or like ground leaves, and then you might do another layer of compost, and then another layer of peat moss, and then another layer of coconut coir, and then you get the picture. The point is that I love lasagna gardening, and you do have to build it up quite tall because it is going to compost over the season. But I love it. And I actually did kind of like a test. Like I built my own soil from Mel's mix, and then I did the lasagna gardening. And honestly, I really did enjoy the lasagna part because I could just use what I had around. When you learn about Mel's mix, you have to go out shopping and you have to go get things. But I really enjoyed that lasagna part because it was just, I could run around my yard and just pick up stuff, organic materials. The point is, I'm going to spend a lot of time on square foot gardening, but please just remember that there is something for everybody in the world of gardening. All right, so I'm going to keep it super simple. I'm going to try. I do love to talk, but what I'm going to do is I think I'm going to go through each of the basics, right? The who, the what, the when, the how, and the why, and I'm going to break kind of square foot gardening into 10 steps. And then we'll kind of ask, then I'll open it up for questions. The one interesting thing about this picture is, first, I haven't seen it in a long time, but this was my lower garden when I first started. This used to be just lawn, and I put up a deer fence, as you can see by the yellow area, and this was like my test garden. This is where I tried lasagna gardening, square foot gardening, square bale gardening container. This was just my experimental station, I guess. Over time, it was just too much to upkeep. That's why I upgraded and I got the kitchen garden. But I haven't seen this picture in a while. Oh, I'm very excited about the biodiesel owner there. Nice. All right, so let me go. So what I love about Mel is, right, he's from Long Island. And what I love about him is that Mel, retired, and in 1975, he retired from being an engineer. And he was like, you know what, why not take up gardening? It seems like a really great kind of hobby to have. So he tended potentially at Port Jefferson, I don't know. But he came to a gardening class that was being offered locally, and the gardening teacher never showed up. So Mel was like, well, darn it, there's all these people here. We're all here for the same reason, right? We all want to garden. And so he said, well, hey, guys, why don't we just talk about gardening and let's try to figure it out ourselves. And so they did. And so he was able to organize all this energy, and they were able to start a community garden. And everybody was so excited for the launch. They brought in soil. I mean, they did everything perfectly. When you walked in initially, it was beautiful rows of vegetables. And right, you didn't think it was great. Like, people came together, they wanted it, and they created their gardens. But the sad news of that story is, by midsummer, it was full of weeds. People got scared away, and then it got abandoned. And I did share that story with Rebecca because it can happen. And I know it's not going to happen to your gardens, your community gardens, but that's what happened with Mel. But what I love about this is there was a bit of an epiphany. And so he thought, well, why are we all planting in rows? Why are we spending so much time weeding? Why are we growing food and walking on more of the soil than we're growing, right? So sometimes people are just used to doing it one way. And I'm not saying that line gardening or row gardening is not right, but it's not the most efficient or effective. And if you don't have a lot of space, it might be a little bit more difficult. So that's what actually made Mel think. And he said, let me think more about plants. Let me do more research. And it comes to find out this technique that you see that he's pointing to, the crux of it is, if you make really good soil, and he has a mix for it, right? A recipe, and every plant needs a specific amount of space. It doesn't need sometimes tons of space. So if every plant has a specific amount of room it needs, and if we work on not walking on the soil, but staying off of it to keep that texture really good, then maybe that could work. Well, it did, and he wrote a book, and it sold millions and millions of copies, and there's trained people like me who teach about this topic. And so first I'll give you a little bit of fun before and afters. Now, granted, this house did cut down a bunch of trees, but this was our backyard before, and this is after. So again, remember personality. This person likes arbors and all kinds of things. So remember, there's a bit of that person here. Patio boxes. You can have a square foot garden on a patio. And if I was scrambling for words before, but when I had that first garden that you saw, I had these boxes because I was like, that can't work. You can't have a little, 6 inches of soil and have it high up. Yep, you can. It's great. So it's a great option as well. This one, whoa, super linear, nice statue in the middle. Right, so it can be just enough, because big or as little as you want, and that come in all shapes and sizes. But if you notice, all of the pictures had these grids. Those grids are going to be very important as we get later on into the presentation. But that's a key point of square foot gardening. This is pretty cool. I think, right, you can even garden on the roof. Again, the claim to fame of Mel's mix is that you only need 6 inches, right? As long as it's good soil, you really don't need a lot. Now, yes, if you're going to tell me that you can't grow carrots in 6 inches of room, or you can't grow potatoes, then you are correct. Although there are a lot of varieties of carrots that are short and not long. The point is you can't grow absolutely everything, but in a moment, I'll show you that you can grow really big things in just 6 inches of soil. This is actually in Iraq, which was pretty cool. So you can have these everywhere. All right. So I'm going to pause, see if we have any questions. I don't see anything in the chat. But now I'm going to kind of break down what the square foot garden is and what are the 10 components. Now these are really they're rules of thumb. Anyway, and so you're gonna, if you're an experienced gardener, you're gonna see how maybe something you learned or knew before about gardening is gonna come into kind of what's important here. Okay, so step 0, right? It's not even the first one. It's just location. You need 6 to 8 hours of sunlight and access to water. So I know it's a given, but I want to mention it. Oftentimes my friends are like, I just bought a home and I really want to have a garden, which is great. You know, I'd like it in this corner, so it's tucked away. But the point is, you do need sunlight. If you're going to grow greens, you know, it could be a little bit less. But if you want to have things like tomatoes and some of your your hot-loving plants, then you're going to definitely need that amount of sun. I always tell people to look up how to do like a sun, I don't even know the word I use it for anymore, but like a sun map. So you mark where the sun is hitting the soil in your yard, and then you just track it for 1 full day so that you can better understand where you can actually place your garden. All right, so layout. As I've alluded to, and you've seen in every single picture that I've shown you, you need to think in squares, not rows. And I understand that fundamentally this is really like a hard thing if you're used to doing in rows, but it's okay. Just think of these as a row that's squished together, maybe, if you look at this box and you try to imagine that. What I think is interesting there's a little statistic here. So it says that compared to single row gardening, you only need 20% of the area to grow the same amount of produce. I'll just sit in one more time. You only need 20% of the area to grow the same amount of produce using square foot gardening. That's awesome. For people that don't have room, this is incredible. All right, so we'll talk more about the squares, but the point is that, as I mentioned, every 1 by 1 square can handle a certain amount of a plant. So 4 lettuce plants, 16 carrots. What's great is that essentially, like, Mel's kind of made gardening into like a recipe. And yes, you can add a little flair here and there, but there's a base process for kind of his gardening method, and these squares are really important. Next is boxes. So it really is important to have it off the ground and to build your own soil. Now, again, if you want to do the sheet composting or something different, then by all means, but the original square foot garden approach actually has you put down weed barrier on the ground, then you put your box on top, you make the perfect soil, and then you put it into the box. So that's the original, the way. But right now, some of my garden boxes are rotting, so I'm using any medium that I can, whether it's rocks or bricks, or actually I love, my new favorite is those big concrete squares. They create kind of a nice wall, but then if you flip them on their side, they have little holes where I like to plant pollinators. So it's really fun. I can have greens in the center and I have a lot of flowers on the outside. All right, gosh, Bartholomew is Mel's last name. That almost stumped me. So it's called, if you just look up on Amazon Square Foot Gardening by Mel Bartholomew, you'll definitely find it. And he has a website full of information. All right, so what's step number 2 here? All right, so this is, this is a basic square foot garden. Like I said, it's a raised bed. It's containing Mel's perfect soil mix, and it's got a grid. Now, I will admit to you all that when I first took the exam for being a square foot gardener, I'm not going to say I failed, but I got scolded because sometimes if I don't have this wood lath, I'll use string, and I'll put screws in the top of the box, and then I'll just weave my string back and forth, and I'll make boxes. So technically, they said that they, you know, since string can break down over time, they don't really encourage that. But be creative. The point is that when things are organized, like look at this. Like this is a beautiful palette. If I put in 4 lettuce plants, 16 carrots, 1 tomato, and each, whatever each square, and I'll give you that recipe after. If you put it perfectly in what a square can contain, it's organized and you know exactly what it is. There's actually a pattern that you should also sew in. So what's nice is that you know when it's a weed or not, right? And especially because you've made this mix from scratch, it's not going to contain weed seeds. So anything that comes up that doesn't match your plant for your square, you're going to know you're out of there, and we're gonna move you out. So just know this is the beauty. This is the quintessential part of the square foot garden. I knew this picture was here. Oops. So remember when I mentioned that 6 inches of soil? Look at that sunflower, right? 6 inches of soil. I'm not joking. You really don't need more to grow a lot of good food. I just always love that picture because it just says 1,000 words. So what's also nice is that when you have a box, you can build above it. If you've got critters, this is nice for bunnies. I guess if you cover the top, it'd be good for protection from any animal, including a deer who may meander over. I believe your community garden does have a really great fencing around it, so that's great. But guys, I will kind of pause here and let you know that I share. When I plant my garden, I know that bugs and animals are going to get part of it, and that's just part of the game, right? That's part of nature. I invite pollinators into my garden because I need them, but if an animal or an insect gets it, that's just part of the process. So I'd like to say that most everybody knows that they're not really just growing for their sustenance, right? We all have other outlets. So the point is that don't get downtrodden if some of those things happen to you. Animals happen. We're all part of this planet, and we can all share. So I always plant a little bit more than I really need. So that's important to not get upset about it. What's nice about the square foot garden too is that you can attach like accessories. So in this case, you make a tunnel for early crops to help protect from the frost. So as you see, it's just like lots of variety and lots of things that you can kind of do with one single box. All right, so I'm going to pause just for a moment for some questions. Oh, and see, the library even has this book, so this is great. All right. All right, so the next one is aisles. So what's really important is that a typical box should be 4 by 4. I don't think I've actually mentioned that yet. It can be 4 by anything after that, but it really is important that you at least have the 4 feet, not much wider. And the reason is that, remember, we don't want to step on the soil. Every time you step on the soil, I've heard, my garden mentor told me, it takes about 7 years to get that same texture back into that soil. If I start talking about soil, I might be here all night, but like soil is everything. Soil is life. The air pockets in the soil, the minerals in the soil, like you need to protect that with everything that you have. So, like I mentioned, my chickens, every year I'm adding organic material. Every year I am feeding that soil. And I know that if I keep my soil healthy, then I know that I will also have a bountiful harvest. Anyway, it's just so important. So the size is really important, but aisles in between those boxes is important too. So remember I said about having personality and being organized. So I personally, I don't know if you noticed in that photo, but I use straw. So I have weed barrier in that whole area that I had mentioned, and I have my boxes, and I have enough rooms that I can move a wheelbarrow down it. I have enough room that I can do a downward dog in yoga position. I have a lot of different things, like I make the spacing so it works for me. But just make sure you can move around it. And you can use lots of materials. I just mentioned I use straw, and what's great is that it is a beautiful sight. And when I first plant my garden, I put beautiful straw down. You can just lay there. and just enjoy it. And it's nice to whatever, take a nap, read a book, whatever you'd like. But then at the end of the season, what happens? I take it all off the aisles and it goes right back onto the beds. And then that protects the beds from the winter. It also stops from some of those nasty weeds that can grow. And it's just a pain to clean up earlier. So every year I'm adding more and more organic material. And that's how, honestly, I don't water my garden. I really probably watered my garden about 2 times last year. I know it's a little bit shocking, but I do such thick kind of, like a mulch on the top that it really does keep and trap in that moisture. All right. So this is going to show another picture of another aisle. So some people choose grass aisles. This allows you to weed whack it. You can mow, right? So don't think that you have to do a lot of crazy things in order to have nice aisles. This person happened to just use what they had on hand, and they used some wood, this wood mulch, and they made some walking paths with some wood that they had around. So just be creative. Remember, make it yourself. All right. So I know I already pontificated on the importance of soil, but just let me elaborate one more time. It's super important. This mix that I'm about to talk to you about, it is wonderful. I will also say it's an expensive initial investment. I will say that once you've done it the first time, you don't need to continue doing it every year as long as you continue to add organic material. So I'm going to go into that recipe in just a second, but really, if you're going to spend any money on materials, then I would definitely focus on the soil. I also realized by looking at these photos that when you make boxes and when I talked about the materials, please, in my opinion, I don't use pressure treated wood. Some people may choose to argue and say that a lot of those chemicals are safe. It's just not something that I'm a completely organic gardener, and even if it's true, I guess I am old school now. I wonder if I should tell my mom this, but I just don't use pressure treated wood. There is stuff in there that I don't know, and I'm not about to do kind of a science research project on myself. So you can buy super cheap pine. Cedar is great, but that's also really expensive, but that naturally lasts longer and tends to keep away bugs. They just don't like to get in there. But anyway, point is that use a variety of materials, but if you're going to use wood, I would opt for on not pressure treated. All right, so the simple mix it's called Mel's Mix, is peat moss, vermiculite, and compost. And he does say that he recommends 5 different types of compost. Now, the one thing about peat moss is, yes, I know that it's a non-renewable resource. Lately, I've been hearing more about using coconut coir, which is another option. But this really does create a lot of that light, fluffy texture. Again, remember, the roots need space and air pockets. So all of these things together really doesn't make a perfect environment to grow. If you don't know what vermiculite is, it's been explained to me, it's like mica that's been heated and it kind of pops like popcorn. So when you hold it, it's really spongy. What's great about that is that vermiculite can suck up water, and it's great when all of the see the white speckles in that soil. That's vermiculite, and so when you water it, it's going to suck up that water and hold it, and it's going to release it back to the plants as needed. So this is your perfect mix. So it's one third, 1/3, 1/3. Just make equal portions of them all. I know 5 types of compost. That's kind of difficult. I've always thought like trying to name them all, but if you have leaf compost that sometimes townships will deliver, great, do that. Some people, if they live on the coast, they can get shellfish, or there's other kinds of compost, that has to do with kind of ocean. I'm just taking a guess because I don't have that near me. You can just do a garden compost. I definitely know I've seen that at Southern States or a local gardening store. Let's see. I know there's lots of others. There's mushroom. And I got it. The last one is worm castings. So that could be your 5th. Point is, do the best that you can. The reason you don't want to go with just one type of compost is because you're looking for a very complex mineral, like a profile of nutrients. And if you just do with one, then you might be lacking in something. So the point is, variety is sometimes, is your friend. So I'm sure if you did a Google search for an updated Mel's Mix, or if I'm sure, I did originally use peat moss. So what I like to say is, yes, it's non-renewable, but I haven't wasted it whatsoever. So I've used it my first time, but then I just keep adding. All right, so what's cool about the square foot garden method is once you get it set up, it's great, right? You invest in your boxes, you've got your soil, and then you're like, gosh, please, no more. And yeah, there's not much more. There's just a few essential tools. So you definitely need a shovel. And what's nice, the reason is that is for planting, but it's also every time you kind of rotate your crops, you're just going to take a little spoonful of new compost and you're going to put that back where that plant used to be. If you work that way, then it's not like a laborious thing you have to do every season if you just add compost to that area every time you rotate your crops. Someone asked about compost from vegetable scraps and leaves from garden. Fantastic. If you're making your own and you have your own composter and it's really cooked down and it's good consistency, 100% that is a great compost source. I would even say that might be two sources, right? Because you've gotten garden scraps and you've got the leaves together. But remember, in order to get a compost really hot and cooking, you've got to pile it up. I actually had a friend, Gita, you might remember Heidi Given. Her town in Vienna, Virginia delivers leaf mulch, but she says every year she gets a whole lot of weeds from it. It's just full of weed seeds. And that's because what the town does is they pick up the clippings off the side of the road and they just shred them. But I said I would 100% take it, but my biggest thing was like, get a ton of it, get it delivered on your driveway, wherever. And then what you need to do is go and get some good soil from your garden and sprinkle it, like kind of like a starter kit, like making kombucha or something. Like you need a starter for that bacteria. I would sprinkle that along in the pile. Then I would take a hose and I would thoroughly soak it. And then I would cover it with a tarp. Point is you really want to like get that bacteria like chomping and getting busy. So that was my recommendation to her when you're creating compost. So remember, you need like a lot of it and you need to give it something. You need to give it a bacteria to start with. Kind of like we do with eating yogurt or kombucha, those types of things. All right. So the grid, I think because they yelled at me that time, I say make it permanent, but just have fun. Some people, if you've ever had those blinds, right? Those vinyl blinds, those are great. You could use those. Anyway, be creative. Use twine, rope, wood lace, vinyl, whatever you want. Just make sure the grid is one by one and that it is permanent. I will say I've cheated and I was like, oh yeah, I'm such a good gardener. I don't need a grid. So I actually went to the dollar store and I made a 1x1 grid and I just hot glued it. So I had a perfect 1x1. I had like a little template, like a cookie cutter. And so I just walked around my garden and I put that square down and I'd plant it and then I'd move it over. By the time things start growing, you forget where those lines were really. And then you're not quite sure if that weed is a lettuce plant, a weed, or the next box, which is spinach. So you get my drift. So like, I've tried it all, though. I've tried it multiple ways, and it really does help just to have something permanent. All right, so this is what I love about Mel's approach. These are all the things that you can plant right in a single box. I'm trying to move all right. For one 4x4 box. So when I told you I moved to the suburbs, I had I started with just 2 4x4 boxes. I had so much food, I literally had to give it away because there was just so much goodness was coming out of there. So this is a lot of food. I don't know how big your family is, but this is an awful lot. Now, I will say that if you were going to grow something like a zucchini, you cannot put a zucchini plant in a box like this. Zucchini actually needs its own box, right? But it does, I think there's some tomatoes here. So tomatoes, right, you just grow them up on the back. So if you, within the book, it teaches you how to make a vertical support for tomatoes. All right, so now that we know and are inspired at how much food can come from one box, let's keep going. So I mentioned that when the quintessential square foot garden is where you've created your own soil, and again you put weed barrier on the bottom. There's a reason for that. Weeds really are people's downfall. When I mentioned that when Mel first started that community garden, weeds just crushed everybody's soul. And no one likes to. No one likes to lean over. No one likes to spend hours on hours just to pull something out of the soil, right? So I think the reason why we push the soil and making the perfect soil and putting this weed barrier is because we understand that weeds are really just one thing that you don't want. Even if you have a squash plant growing in your compost, that is considered a weed as well. But his hope is to keep it free of weeds as much as possible. And by putting down the weed barrier, then you're not going to have things from your yard shooting up. There's some very aggressive weeds out there that will grow from your soil, even with 6 inches of soil, that it will grow all the way up. So definitely use it. And I mean, the weed barrier that I have, I've been here since 2007, and I've never changed my weed barrier, but I clean it every year, meaning I sweep it. This is just an example of when I mentioned I lived in Ashburn, Virginia. This was my first urban garden ever. I have cucumbers growing up the back. I also have the tomatoes. As you see, I had a bunny problem. Virginia suburbs are full of little bunnies that love to munch. So by building this one little mesh chicken wire, it kept them out. But as you see, because I had the box, I could easily make that fencing and just keep it with a little bit of support. So these are all the things I grew. Keep in mind, I do have marigolds in there. I do have cantaloupe because remember, I grow up, so I utilize vertical gardening again. So you can fit a lot of things in. All right. Grow vertically. We've already talked about this. I will bring your attention to, in Mel's book, they talk about growing tomatoes. Tomatoes are vines. That's what they are. So if you let them get out of control, they will get out of control. I literally think there are determinate and indeterminate types, meaning some will grow forever. I mean, they will grow until the end of the season. If anybody has had cherry tomatoes, you'll be nodding your head because they just grow and grow and keep growing. So in the book, I talk about pinching off those little suckers that come out. So if this is a vine and this is my thumb is like one of them, something will come out in the middle, and that actually, if you cut that off, you can plant that and that will turn into another tomato plant. When in doubt, it definitely would work. So I've done it. But the point is that vertically, definitely pay attention to his tips about growing tomatoes and to keep it from being crazy bushy. But vertically, remember, it keeps air moving through. It helps with having rot. Blight is something that most every tomato gardener is going to encounter. It kind of looks, like start looking a little bit yellow, and then it's going to start spreading. It's just a bacteria. There are ways to manage it, but once it gets a hold, it's essentially in the air, and at some point your tomato plants will get blight. Anyway, it's just part of nature. There are definitely things that you can do to help, but if you keep the air moving and you don't water from above, which we'll talk about in a second, then you'll have a better chance moving forward. All right, someone asked, in terms of rotating, what about plants that last through the winter? So I have one strawberry plant that has grown and survived for 4 years. That's fantastic. So in terms of rotation, then I would just take a little compost and I just put it around the outside of the plant. And I'm assuming with 4 years that you have lots of runners, and I'm assuming that you've kind of thinned those or given some good friends some good plants. So yeah, if you have, keep in mind, that's a great point. I have lots of things in my garden that are perennial. So I have asparagus. I have rhubarb. You always plant garlic in the fall, right? So the rule, it's not like you clean house when you grow, but you can just add it around the outside of the plant. All right. So that's another, this picture, right, is of a, I don't know if that's a pumpkin or not, but the point is that it's a fruit that some people wouldn't think they could grow up. All right, plant spacing. Just follow, this is actually a garden that I built for someone that was a coworker or a manager that I worked with. She asked me to build beds for her. As you see, I ended up using grass for her aisles. But the point is that don't get crazy. A lot of people love to take lots of seeds and just think, oh, a few more for good measure. You don't need to do that because remember, like you want to keep things organized. So just don't overplant. I see that Rebecca just joined, and she confided in me, or not confided, but told me that there's always room for another tomato plant. But by the middle of the season, you realize, oh, that thing is just taking over. So there's no reason to like try to shove it all in there, right, Rebecca?
Every time, Linna, every time.
It's a problem for me too. I told my daughter this evening, I said, don't let me plant any more than 4 tomato plants. And she rolled her eyes because I typically have 18. I have a family of 4 and like 2 of them hate tomatoes. So it's ridiculous. It is a problem. We should join a club. But you know what? I'm going to share a book that I love. It's called The Animal Vegetable Miracles by Barbara Kingsolver. She has a beautiful tradition. On Mother's Day, she delivers tomato plants to her friends. And so ever since I've read that book, I always deliver tomato plants to my friends, my mom friends, because it's just a beautiful sentiment. Because Mother's Day is the time when you can plant your warm weather crops, which we'll get into. All right, so this is a page from the book. And again, when I mentioned 16 carrots or, this is a perfect amount of room for that plant. Mel has done the research for you so that you know that these plants this is the amount of soil that they need. So you can see the ones, onions and radishes, go crazy. But as you get to some of the bigger plants, while they look baby and small when you get them, whether you sprout them yourselves or you buy them, they're gonna get bigger. So just follow the recipe and don't think you're gonna like sneakily add more and it'll just work out. This is definitely tried and true. And the reason I can tell you all that is because I've tried. I was like, oh, just a few more extras, but then I never want to pull the extras. So that's always my problem. All right, so water. So this is interesting. So, well, the basic rules are do not water from above, right? Rebecca, you were so lucky to have her because you have drip irrigation. She fought for that. It'd be so much easier just to have something over the top. But when you start doing that, you invite all kinds of bad things. If a plant is wet at night, it invites bacteria and all kinds of bad things, and leaves catch water. And if they can't get to the roots, then you're really in trouble. Mel, I'll just tell you, his recipe is that you should just have a big bucket of water in your garden area. You should keep it full, and you should allow the sun to heat it up. And then you should just take a container, and every so often, I'm not going to tell you exactly how well because we all live in different areas, but you should take that container and you should go right up to the base of the plant and water it. You're going to get deep water. That's what you need. Oftentimes people will spray it with a hose, and if you scratch away the surface, it's dry. And that's the worst, because when that happens is your roots, they're going to come up to the surface like this because they want that water, and then they're going to get hot and burned, and it's not good. So his recommendation is, and what you got, if you have drip irrigation, fantastic. But if you don't, then just it seems laborious to hand water each plant, but I guarantee you're going to get a much deeper watering, and it's going to be water that your plant can actually get to. So keep that in mind. All right, so step 10, harvesting. I think my best rule of thumb when it comes to harvesting is remember that the broccoli, well, we all think of the head of broccoli as like that's the main event. It doesn't have to be. Broccoli leaves are really tasty, especially when they're young. Think about microgreens, right? It's been a craze for a couple of years now. Well, those are just baby plants. So if you happen to plant some extra things, just know you could take those and add them to a sandwich. Maybe you're making avocado toast and you just want to add some greenery to that, by all means. When you plant 16 carrots, maybe you don't need them all to come in at the same time. So don't be afraid, guys. I feel like, and I fall prey to this as well, like you plant it and then you want like the big reveal. But if you do that, keep in mind, like in the meantime, like a rabbit might come and take it, a deer might. So just enjoy everything about your garden. If you have a young baby carrot, enjoy it. Enjoy that it's not full size, but enjoy how sweet it is. That beautiful broccoli, take off those leaves. When a broccoli plant gets bigger, those are kind of waxy, and I wouldn't recommend using those. But when they're young, they're delightful. You can cut them up, you can put them into stews. Actually, I always share this because I feel like some people don't know this, but the sweet potato plant is one of my favorite. I used to not like sweet potatoes, so I only grew them for their leaves. Now, sweet potatoes are not part of the potato family, which is nightshade, and you should never eat a potato leaf. But sweet potatoes you can. They're very popular in African cooking and Asian cooking. My brother's wife is Vietnamese, and when she comes, she just harvests all the leaves, and it's a very soft green. I put it into green smoothies, much milder than kale if you're not a fan of kale, but like to have greens. I would really recommend so tonight, if you're like, Linna, I got all that, I'm a good gardener. If you haven't grown sweet potatoes for the leaves, please make this your year. You'll love it. And you'll think back to this day. All right, so I wanted to make sure I got to questions, but I just wanted to just show a little bit more inspiration. Remember, let the garden represent you. Just be creative. Whether, I don't care if you're an artist or not, just go with it and create something that represents you. No matter what, it's going to be beautiful. So that's a sweet potato, and those are super big. I must have really good soil. That's my daughter. It was a couple of years ago, but those are sweet potatoes in her hands. They're ginormous, as you see. She was very proud of those. So one of my colleagues was interviewing me about gardening, and I realized that I did have some rules of thumb. So 2 months prior to the frost date, you can start planting. When you see dandelions bloom, I know that the soil is warm enough to plant potatoes. So anyway, these are just my rules of thumb. I have more, but Mother's Day is I just wait. I wait for Mother's Day to plant my warm weather crops. A lot of people take a little bit of risk there, and I don't know. I guess I'm old fashioned because remember, if you get a hard frost, you will lose your plants, especially like tomatoes. They're dead. They're not recoverable. So just know. All right. I'm just going to flip through these. I'm happy to share this deck, but these were just things that I kind of found that I liked. Just to talk whether if you're a first-time gardener or getting used to kind of your rhythm, I truly love spring and fall the best because I do a lot of Asian greens and I just really enjoy. They're hardy and there's not as many bugs, so I really love cool weather veggies. So these are some of my favorites. These are some of my warm weather favorites, but I definitely love trying new things. I've grown quinoa and amaranth, and I just always try kind of new types. This is hard to see, but it's very loved. This came from my gardening mentor, but I want you to notice that this, if you had it and you zoomed in, it talks about what temperature was it a cool versus warm? How much spacing do you need? How many per square foot? Should you direct seed it or transplant it? So anyway, this is what I call my little garden Bible. So I'm happy to share. This one's a little bit easier to read. The point is, guys, there's so many people that love gardening, and there's so many good things out there. Just know you don't have to figure it out for yourself. So before I answer the questions, these are my favorite seeds. Super Seeds is my 100% hands down. They're based out of Brunswick, Maine. I've visited them before. It's run by a family. I like it because seed packets are like $1.25, and they don't have 500 lettuce seeds. They have 50. For a normal family, you don't need 500. $4.50 is just fine. So these are my favorite. And I was actually telling Rebecca about these. These are some of my favorite books. I'm re-listening to Animal Vegetable Miracle, and it has a lot about sustainability, which I love, but it's exciting too to live through a year through her eyes. And then the $64 tomato, I think mine probably are 150, but whatever. It's a funny read if you're a gardener and you just want to like laugh your butt off. I read this out loud with my mom, who is my inspiration for being a gardener. So granted, this was me many moons ago. I'm much older now, but it's still, I no longer have the website foodscaper.com, but my email is va.foodscaper. I'm welcome to answer any questions. I'll answer the ones in the chat now, but VA Foodscaper is because I believe that you should landscape with food, not just flowers. So anyhow, all right, let's get to see some questions. Thanks, Gita. The drip irrigation is amazing. Oh, someone grew $1 million cherry tomatoes. That is epic. I hope you shared for sure. All right, let me get to the top. All right, so we talked about some after the rotation. Okay, I had antelopes growing up. One got wedged in between the slats of my wooden fence, a little off topic. Okay. Oh, overwintering elephant ears. Yes, we should talk because I actually need some help with that. But I love elephant ears. Yes, and typically what my mom does is she will pull out the elephant ear bulb. She will cut them all the way down, and then she will dry them out, and then she will hold them in like a kind of like a cold storage, or sometimes she wraps them in a brown paper bag and puts them somewhere cool for the rest of the season. All right, let's see. What about a weeping hose on the ground touching each plant? I would probably stay away from touching the plant, but just make sure, if I'm assuming weeping hose is similar to drip irrigation, as long as, remember, if you don't want to sit in water, like neither do plants. So their roots can also get waterlogged. I mean, hopefully it can, the point is they still need drainage. So as long as it's keeping it moist but not overwatering, then it should work. And you know what? You don't need to listen to me. Your plants are going to tell you. You're going to see when they're distressed because they're going to start turning yellow. See. So growing corn. So if I do corn, I will plant the whole 4x4 area. I've tried not doing that, and then it just wasn't. You need a lot of pollination with corn. So if you're going to go, I honestly don't think corn is great for doing in square foot gardening, but it can be done. But I would actually do the whole box. And the name of the seed place in Maine, it's superseeds.com. But it's, my goodness. Now I just got a very large order from them. So it's Pine Tree. I always say the website is not the same name as the actual catalog. So guys, I know we are to time, but I hope that you guys enjoyed. I'm happy to answer any other questions, happy to stay on, but I hope you just know that gardening is such a gift, and right, there are so many people who have done it, but be creative. If you don't want to take my advice, and you want to plant 10 tomatoes all together in a small space, you do that and you see how that goes at the end of the season. But that's the best way for you to learn. All right. So don't be afraid, be creative, have fun with it. And I hope I wish you well in all of your journeys.
I just want to jump on really quickly and thank Linna from the bottom of my heart and the top of my garden this year. It's really, she's so incredibly engaging. I feel very lucky to have found her on the World Wide Web. And now we got to chat and connect as friends. And thank you for this gift, Linna, to everyone here on this call, as well as for everyone who gets to watch the video of this presentation hereafter. I'm sure that I'm going to be referencing back to it, even this bit that I've caught and everything else. So thank you so much for the gift that will keep on giving.
Yay! You're very welcome. Thanks, guys.